If you're like me and you teach the NGSS science standards, then your science test and my science test are not the science tests of old, where they just have to memorize facts. On these science tests, these students have to analyze, interpret, draw conclusions, justify their claims, and also back up claims with evidence. And that means that they need to understand claim, evidence, reasoning. So when it comes time to prepare our students for the test, I've got a few suggestions for you to help them understand how to write a CER, a claim, evidence, reasoning answer. Hi, I'm Christy from Adventures in ISTEM. I'm a middle school science teacher with over 25 years experience in the classroom, and I love helping other teachers empower their students to take more ownership of their learning. So let's get started. So when it comes to breaking down claim, evidence, reasoning for your state science test, the first place I like to start off is just, do they even understand what the question is asking? Many students do not even know how to answer a question, or if they do answer the question, their claim is not actually answering it. So the first thing I like to do is have my students just identify, what is the question? What are you being asked to answer? And that's the first step. Now what you can do is you can give them a practice problem where there's a passage, there's a graph, diagram, or a data table for them to analyze, and a question there. And the first thing you can do is have them just look over it and then highlight the question, circle the question, underline the question. Just identify, do they even know what the question is? Now the first time I did this, I had my students, highlight the question. And I was actually amazed at how many students did not know what the question was. They couldn't find it on that practice problem. Even with the question mark at the end, they were struggling with that. So that was the first step, helping them understand where to find the question on the test. The second thing is you want to actually break down the question. Have them actually circle what the key parts of the question are. What do they have to actually answer? What is it asking them to do? Are they comparing? Are they finding the relationship? So are they finding how? Does the question ask how something happens? So you want them to identify those key parts of the question. Now once they've understood the question, then they need to be able to look at that information to gather some evidence. And that's a part where the students kind of struggle. They like to just tell me if there's a data table or a graph. They're like, oh, the temperature went up. That's great. How do you know though? My question always is back to them. How do you know? What evidence gave you that information? What were the actual numbers? So my students practice that if there is a graph, if there is a data table, evidence has to come from that graph. It is the specific numbers, the specific information. Evidence comes from that data table. It is the specific numbers, it is the specific information. So when we're writing our evidence statements, we need to be looking at the actual numbers on the graph or the data table. If they're looking at a diagram, and let's say it's a food web diagram, what is the arrow starting at and where is the arrow going? That's what we're looking at. What are we seeing? I want them to describe that little graph, describe that diagram, So when it comes to evidence, helping the students realize that just like when they're doing a historical document, that evidence comes from who said that quote, when was it said, what was the date, person, date, right? For us in science, it's about what was the data, what was your numbers, when were those numbers coming in, which columns are we talking about, right? It's the actual information. If there was a color change, how do you know there was a color change? What was the starting color? What was the ending color? So I try and get them to practice just being specific. Now what you could do with that, if you wanted to, you could just do a data table or a graph a day. And the only thing you do with that is you have them pull out 2 evidence sentences. And I always tell them, you have to tell me, where did you get the information from? So according to the data table or the graph or the data table shows, so where did you get that information from and what is the information you're pulling from it? And have them just practice. Have them really quickly just write down 2 sentences from that. So that's an idea that you can do as you're running up to the test. Just have them practice analyzing and interpreting data. Just that, writing down evidence sentences. They don't have to explain the evidence, just can you give me 2 evidence sentences from this data table, from this graph, from this diagram. And maybe that's all you do for 2 weeks straight, right? Moving on, with that practice problem, so we have that evidence, right? We've identified the question, we have the evidence. Now it's time for the reasoning. This is where they're explaining it. Now tell me what is going on. What are you actually seeing? And how does that relate to what you already know, right? So if the temperature went from 24 to 27, now in the reasoning, you can talk about how the temperature increased as, let's say, the kinetic energy increased. And you can talk about what you know about kinetic energy and how it affects temperature, right? So that's what the reasoning is. The reasoning is the explanation. It's the story behind it. What do you know about this topic? What is it presenting you? Why do you think this is happening? That's the reasoning. So what I find for me, it's not that my students have trouble with reasoning. I know a lot of teachers feel that their students have trouble with reasoning. To me, I feel like they're putting their reasoning in the evidence section. They're using they're explaining, instead of giving me actual evidence like the numbers, the colors, what the graph is actually, the observation of the graph, they're explaining it. So it's not that they don't understand reasoning, they're just putting it in the wrong location. And so when I help them see that, then they start to pull it back. So if you see that your students are doing reasoning, but they're doing it as evidence, that's where you can direct them. Hey, this is great reasoning. This is perfect for the reasoning section. What evidence gave you that though? Where can that be? So that's where my students struggle, and they don't put the actual numbers of the evidence. They do a lot of reasoning. So that's where I'm helping them. And you could have it where you give them a data table, you give them 2 evidence sentences and say, okay, now explain that. Explain these evidence sentences. Maybe even you give them the claim. You give them the claim and the evidence, and then they have to come up with the reasoning for it. This is the claim, here's my evidence. Why am I using that evidence? What is it showing me? How does that link to the claim? And just do a few practices with that. Breaking it down so that they're only focusing on one particular part is very helpful. So again, you can give them a whole practice problem, which is what I usually do about 6 weeks out. Every single day, we work on one practice problem for that whole entire week, and we just break it down by section. One day it's identify the question. One day it's looking over the evidence. One day it's making our claim. One day it's presenting our reasoning. Breaking it down step by step. What you can also do is, before even that, you could spend 1 week on, here's the question, here's evidence and reasoning going on, what is a claim? Or give them 4 different claims to choose from, which claim is best and why. And that's every single day. Every single day it's just, here are 4 claims for this question, here's the data table, which claim is best and why. And that's all you focus on. The next week it's, here's a data table, give me 2 evidence sentences. Next week it's, here's a claim, here's my evidence sentences, give me some reasonings. And every single day you focus on a little bit. Focusing just like 5-10 minutes every single day helps prepare them for the state test. So for a state test, it's important that you don't just do a 1 week, all day long, get the students ready, like a drill and kill type deal. Instead, it's little increments. You get them into the habit, maybe 2 months running up to the test, just a little bit each day, 5-10 minutes. Instead of your warm-up that you might do, that's what you do instead, right? Get this start going and then work on whatever it is you need to work on. Because I don't know about you, but usually I'm trying to finish up the rest of my standards and then that state test hits, right? And there's no way I'm getting all those standards in before the state test hits. So I'm busy doing that, but it's taking 5-10 minutes out of every single day, just a little bit, to practice CER. So those are my suggestions for helping your students knock out and be successful in the claim evidence reasoning of a state NGSS science test. Have a great day.